And hello, parents and students. I am just going to go over um, these are problems that are going to be on the Module 4 test tomorrow. I changed the names and I changed the numbers, but they are worded the same or very similar. Some I mixed up a little bit by saying something a little bit different. Like I'm going to represent the equation here. I have it where they have to draw and represent it, and that's why I did it in class like that, so that they are able to recognize it when they look on the testimony, because they don't have to actually represent that themselves. So I'm going to start. I'm just going to go left to right and then go down, starting with the 100s. This is the Jeopardy that we did in class. Unfortunately, part of the students did not get to finish all of it, so I just want to make sure we go through it and just kind of talk about it, and I hope that you are able to understand what we're doing. So I'm starting right here. Larry bikes 77 and 8,800 kilometers in 22 days. What is the average distance Larry bikes each day? So when it comes to this problem, I'm just going to be dividing my standard, nothing crazy. Okay, I'm just doing my standard algorithm here. I'm dividing 77 and 8,800 kilometers into 22 days. So I'm just going to set it up like I normally would, like a long division problem. So 22, I can't do that into 7. So I move to 77. And I know that 20 times 3 will give me close to 60, right? So now I'm going to use that information to get me as close as possible. So I'm going to use 22 times 3 in order to do my first space here. So 22 times 3 is 66. I'll subtract and I get 11. And I have to bring down my 8. Okay, so now I have to divide 22 into 118. So I know that it's going to be a little bit higher than 3, right? Because I know that 22 times 3 is only 66. So at least maybe, I would say probably at least a 5. So I'm going to do 22 times 5. 2 times 5 is 10, excuse me. And then I carry my 1. 2 times 5 is 10 again. If that is 11. So I get 110. 8 minus 0 is 8, and those two 11s cancel out and give me 0. So I bring down my last 8. And I notice immediately that that's going to divide evenly into it. So, and I know exactly what 2 times a certain number gets me 88, and that's 4. So I'm going to put that 4 above my second 8, and then I will finish up my problem. And now I don't leave it like that. I have to remember to go back and add my decimal. So remember, I have to have the same amount of digits behind my decimal in my dividend as I do in my divisor plus my quotient. So in this case, my divisor doesn't have any digits behind the decimal, and you will see that as a trend throughout the entirety of this test. In this grade, we do not do anything different than that. So we are going to put our decimal, really it's going to kind of go up. As long as you were staying in place above the correct number, it will just go up on top where the other one went, okay? So my final answer is 3 and 5400 kilometers. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to patterns of decimals 100 here. So I need to understand that there are certain patterns when it comes to decimals. So whenever I divide by certain things like 10 or 100 or 1,000, it will follow a pattern. So I also know from my chapter, I think it was module, I want to say it's module 4, lesson 2. We talk about the patterns of decimals. Or it was just the first one. Anyway, we understand that if I divide by 100, it's like multiplying by 1/100, or you can write it as 100. So I don't have to divide. I can multiply by 100 if that's easier for me. So, but I also know that it depends on how many zeros I have. That can also show me that I can move my decimal that many places. So if I have 55 pounds to start with, and I need to divide that by 10, because if I read this problem, okay, Pepper's Pizza Shop uses 55 pounds of flour to make 100 pizzas. Which equation would represent the amount needed to make 10? It's not asking me for 100 because they already gave me that amount. They're asking me for 10. So I need to either divide by 10 or I can multiply by 1/10. So in this case, it doesn't matter as long as I understand what to do. If I multiply that, I know that my rule is if I multiply a number by a decimal, I have to have that many digits behind the decimal in my product. And that's a 1. So 55 times 1, 1, but then I have to put my decimal between my two 5s. I can also divide it like this, or just understand that because I'm just dividing by 10, my decimal moves one place value to the left. So let's do that number again. My decimal is behind my 55, and then I move one decimal place to the left when I divide by 10. I know that was a lot of different things, but that's what I just want to get all of that out there so we kind of talk about all of those things. Okay. So for estimation, on this particular test, it has a lot of it's not literal rounding. It's not the standard, like, I know that 0 through 4, you stay on the floor, and 5 through 9, you move up the line by 1, right? It's not that type of estimation in these two problems. So these two problems, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm going to be looking for what's called a compatible number. So instead of looking for a number that, like I'm not going to round this to 6, right? Normally if I rounded this, I would round this 50, 5, I look at the 7 and that would give me a 6, right? In this case, that's not what I'm doing. I look at 57 and I see that it's being divided by 8. And I know that a number that's similar to 57 is 56, which is divisible by 8. So I can write it as 56 divided by 8 because I know that that is 7. So if I know that 56 divided by 8 is 7, a good estimate would be 7/10, because I have to have my decimal placed in the correct place. So I start with my dividend has 1 digit. I did not divide it by a decimal. So my final product, my quotient, should have a decimal, okay? This one right here. So whenever I talk about representing the equation, I'm going to go ahead and show you directly what I'm going to do. I'm going to show you exactly what it says. So, banner that is 1 6/10 meters long. He draws a line dividing the banner into 2 equal parts. What is the length of each part of the banner? So I'm going to use it it is called an area model. It's not quite the same thing as the area model that the students are used to, but it is a form of an area model. So these two numbers, I'm going to create 1 6/10 meters on a decimal grid. So I know that I have one whole, and then I have 6/10. So I'm going to color in 6 columns on my decimal grid. Now let's divide it into 2 equal parts. Well, I see that if I ignore that decimal for a little bit, it's 16. Now I know that 16 divided by 2 is 8. So all I have to do is I need to go and I need to circle 2 groups of 8/10. On the test, this is represented already for them, and they use it in order to solve their problem. They cannot create this on their own during the test. But this right here will be on their test, and they can use it to understand the problem. What my answer will be is what is in one of the groups. Not all of them, not 2 of them, one of the groups. So in this group, because I know that 16 divided by 2 is 8, and I found that this was 8/10, that is my quotient here. My quotient is 8/10. I am going to not talk about the just solve because the students tended to understand that portion of the review. But I want to talk more about these word problems because these are word for word from their test, and they don't have anything like this on their test. So Laurel cuts a piece of paper that is 12 and 25 inches wide into 5 pieces of equal width. What was the width of each piece of paper? So I told the students multiple times, each is a keyword, and whenever it is in my question, it typically means that I'm going to divide. And we should know that their entire test is about division. So, like I said, I'm going to divide these 2 numbers. I'm just doing it the standard way. I'm using long division. I'm not doing anything different than regular division. I'm using my standard algorithm to solve these problems. So 12 and 25 hundredths divided by 5. I can't divide into 1, so I look at 12. And I know that 5 times 2 will give me 10, which is close enough to 12. So then I'm left with 2. Remember, students, if I ever get a number that is larger than my divisor, whenever I subtract, I did something wrong and I need to divide even further. Okay? So then I bring down my 2. 5 into 22, I know that 5 times 4 is 20. So then I subtract, I get 2, and I bring down my 5. And I know that 5 times 5 is 25, which gives me 245, but that's not my final answer. I have to go back and add my decimal between my 2 and my 4 because I have 2 digits in my dividend, so I need 2 digits in my quotient. Patterns of decimals. Which equation can be used to find 1/10 of 124 and 1/10? So I will take this and I'm dividing it by 10, or like this. I'm going to write it 3 ways. There are so many different ways. There's so many different ways that you could represent this. All of these are doing the exact same thing. There is no change here, except for the way that it looks. So, like I had up here, whenever I found 1/10 of this number up here, I'm just going to do the same thing. divide by 10, I'm moving my decimal place 1 to the left. So I get 12 and 4100. It could be represented in any of these ways. We will see the division more so on this test. However, you can understand and know that those two things also represent the same thing. Estimation 200. Which is the best estimate of the quotient of 1 and 9/10 divided by 7? The students in my first class today, they saw this number and they went down. So whenever you do a best estimate like this, you can do multiple things. You could change it to 1 4/10, or you could do 2 1/10. Because 14 and 21 are both divisible by 7. However, my recommendation is to do the one that is the closest one to the number. In this case, whenever I originally made this presentation and everything, I did it with 21 in mind, not 14. However, both work. Because one thing that the students need to understand is that they can make a best estimate by either going up or going down to be less or more than the dividend. It can be either way. So I take this one right here and I would get 3/10. And if I did it with this number, I would get 2/10. Because 2 times 7 is 14 and 3 times 7 is 21. And so that is what it should look like because I divided with a whole number. I have a decimal as my quotient. Here, this is the same idea as we had earlier. It is not this big of a problem on their paper, but I wanted to talk about it. So a carpenter has a log that measures 65 and 5/10 meters long. He cut the log into 5 equal lengths. Represent with a quick picture. So the way that I can set this up is I'm going to use base 10 blocks here. I'm going to draw a quick picture, which just means that I am using base 10 blocks in its simplest form. So a square means that I am using a flat or a 100, right? And in decimals, it represents the ones place. I also have a rod. I call it a rod in class. You could also call it a long, which represents the tenths. And then a little dot, you can do a bigger circle, but whatever it is, whatever you use is the hundredths place. So using these 3 items, we can break this down. I used a bigger number than I probably should have here because that's not what I can do here. But if I were to divide it up and I was representing it using a base 10 block, I can divide it using the standard. I can start by going to the standard. I can break it up. I'm going to do it. I'm going to look. I have 5. I have 5 into 6, which is 1. Take that down here. I subtract 1. Bring down my 5, and I get 15. And that will be exact. And then I bring down my 5. I get another 1. And then I have a remainder of 0. So then I have to put my decimal somewhere. And in this case, there's only 1 digit behind the decimal. So I am left with 13 and 1. And whenever I would represent this, I would use something. In this case, the one that's on their test is a little bit different than this. And I did a number that was a little too big for what I needed. So I'll show you in a different one. So a class of 28 students, that banner that measured at 18 and 76 feet. If you divided it into 28 equal parts and they decorated each section, how much did each student decorate? I'm going to use a separate sheet of paper for this because it's getting a little tight here. So I'm going to write 18 and 76 divided by 28. So I cannot divide 28 into 1. I also can't divide 28 into 18. So now I'm left with 187. So I know that I'm going to have to multiply pretty significantly to get up to this number. So I think that I'll start with something like 6. I know that 8 times 6 is 48. 2 times 6 is 12, plus 4 is 16. I cannot subtract 8 from 7, so I make this a 17 and I borrow. 17 minus 8 is 9. 7 minus 6 is 1. And then I bring down my 6. So I know that my number is bigger than that number that I just used. So I'm going to try by going up one more place. So I'm just going to make it a 7. 7 times 8 is 56. 2 times 7 is 14 plus 5 is 19. So then I get 0. And I have to go back up and I need to make sure that I place my decimal in the correct place. So I have 2 places behind the decimal. So I have 2 places behind the decimal. Leaving me with 6,700 feet. So now I'm going to look at number 300 here. Number 300. Martha used 19 cups of flour to make 100 muffins. She divides to find out how many cups are needed. Where should the decimal point be placed in the quotient? So in this case, I'm following that same method, only instead of 10, now I have 100. So instead of moving just one place value to the left, I'm going to have to move 2. And I know that because I have two zeros in my number, so that means I shift over twice. So if I have 19, I start with my decimal right here. I move over 2 places, giving me 19 hundredths. And that's it for that one. Josie divided 68 and 1400 pounds of sugar into 7 containers. She rounds the number of pounds of sugar to the nearest 10 to estimate how much sugar should go into each container. What was her estimate? Oh, I like this problem because instead of it telling me just to estimate to whatever, it tells me exactly what place I need to round to, which is the 10th place. So I'm going to take my number, and I'm going to round to the 10th place. So I'm going to circle my 6. I'm going to look over to the right and underline it. Not 8. That's 5 through 9. So that means that I'm going to move up 1. So this 6 turns into a 7, and everything else turns to 0. So I'm left with 70. Remember, I'm dividing that 70 into 7 containers. So it's an easy quick. My estimate is 10. 300 underrepresented. So Gardner has 693 pounds of plant food. If we divide it into equal portions for 3 tomato plants, I'm going to draw a picture that shows how much plant food he has for each plant. So I'm going to divide this into 3. So I know that I can fit 3 into 6 2 times. So that means whenever I go to write my picture, and I'm going to use base 10s, so remember this is my ones place, and my ones are represented by a flat. So I'm going to need 1, 2 for each of my groups, and there are 3. I'm going to continue my problem. I know 3 times 2 is 6, I get 0, and I bring down my 9. So in this case, I know that 3 times 3 is 9. That means that I'm going to have 3 tenths. 3 tenths in each group. 3 times 3 is 9. Bring down that 3, and I finish it off, which gives me 1 in my hundredths place. So I have 1/100th in each group. This is how I represent this problem in the base 10 form. Now, this is a couple more. So it costs $87.65 for 12 tickets to the aquarium. All tickets cost the same amount. What is the best estimate for the cost of one ticket? Well, I look at these numbers here, and I try to think of the number that's closest to 12, or closest to 87, that's divisible by 12. So in this case, I know that one of my math facts is what times 12 is 84. It's 8. So I know that I could do it that way. I could say that $84 divided by 12 is 9. That's one way I could do it. Another way I could do it is I could round both of these numbers. I can just round them the standard way. I can change this number to a 90 because my 7 changes my 8 to a 9. And then the 1 would stay the same because my 2 would make it stay the same. And that would give me 9 as well. Either way, these work the same way. It's just depending on how you want to round it. So Sarai has 4 7 gallons of paint. She needs to have this amount of paint for 10 different projects. How much total paint will she need? So in this case, I am multiplying. I threw a couple of multiplication in here to make sure that the students were being reassessed over this content. So I'm multiplying 4.7 or 4 7/10 times 10. So one thing that's really great about multiplying by 10 is I just have to shift my decimal one place to the right, leaving me with 47. It's simple math. I don't have to do anything crazy. I just shift my decimal over to the right one because I have 1 0 in my other factor. And it's a 1 in the ones place, or 10 place. So then a mountain climber eats 38 and 4 10 ounces of trail mix on a 6-day climb. What is the estimate of the average number of ounces of trail mix the mountain climber eats each day? I'm going to move this over. 38 and 4 and 6. I want to find a compatible number here. So I know that something times 6 gets me close to 38. And that is 6. 6 times 6 gets me 36. So in this case, I will change that number to 36 divided by 6, giving me 6. As simple as that. Finding the number that's closest to it. And I could have gone up, right? I could have changed it to the next available number, which would be 7. 6 times 7. But that number is a little bit further away and more distant. And typically on the multiple choice, they don't have an option where you can go up or down. It's just very straightforward. So next I have 400 here, and remember this is represent the equation. So for this one, this is another one of those that we can use the decimal grids for. So I'm just going to represent it doing the standard, and then they'll be able to look at this later on. So we have 6 and 50 hundredth foot submarine sandwich. That is a huge submarine sandwich, not gonna lie. And then we have 5 pieces in equal length. We need to find out how long each is. So I'm just going to be dividing these two numbers. So I have 5 into 6, which is 1. I subtract. I get 1, and I bring down my 5. 5 times 3 is 15. I get 0, and I bring down 0. Means I'm putting a 0 back up here. It multiplies to get 0. And I'm done here. So then I just need to put my decimal between my 1 and my 3. It can be 1 and 30, strictly 1 and 30 hundredths, just depending on what is given on these multiple choice. And when I represent this on that decimal grid, it would just be that I have, like I said before, it's the, for here we can do it in the base 10 blocks also. So I have one whole in 5 groups. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And then I have 3 tenths. And that's it. I've done my 5 groups. I have 1 and 3 tenths. And there's no hundredths. So that's how it is. That's just as it is. Okay. Last 4. So the plumber cut 33 and 36 hundredth meters of pipe into 4 equal pieces. How long is each piece? I'm just dividing here. 33 and 36 hundredth meters divided by 4. Can't do 4 into 3. I know that 4 times 8 gives me 32, which is closest to this number. So I get 1, and I bring down my 3. 4 into 13. I know that the closest number that I can multiply to get to something close to 13 is 2, because, 3. Because 4 times 3 is 12. I have 1, I bring down my 6. 4 to 16, that goes equally in 4 times. And then my decimal goes between my 8 and my 3, because I have 2 digits here, so I need 2 digits here. And that would be in meters. Colby is trying to buy a toy that originally cost $123.50. The toy is on sale for 1/10 of the price. So I need to write an equation to solve the problem. So I have my 2 numbers, and I know in this one I'm also multiplying. So I'm going to be multiplying this number right here. Whenever I multiply by a 10th, I'm going to be shifting my decimal 1 place to the left. So my final answer will be $12.35. Because whenever I multiply by that 1/10, I shift over 1 to the left. If I multiply by a whole number, I move 1 to the right. Based on those zeros, and in this case, this would be based on the digits behind the decimal. Because 1/10, you have 1 behind it. Hannah practices her violin for 34.5 minutes every day for 5 days. Excuse me. So about how many minutes did you practice in total? So I take these two numbers and I need to round. 34 and 5 tenths. So I'm going to have 4, and so that means my number stays the same. And I'm multiply that by 7. It gives me 210. I can do it a couple different ways. Some of my students decided to find a compatible number instead. So they found something that multiplied by 7 that was close to 34. In this case, the two lowest numbers, or the two numbers that are closest, would be 5. So you could do 35 divided by 35 times 7. And you could do the next closest one would be under that, so that would be 28 times 7. Those two would be the closest numbers, but 35 is the closest. And they could have done either one of them. So then lastly, provider cuts 3 20/100 yards of rope into 4 equal pieces. How long is each piece? So similarly, I can use the standard to help set up my problem. So I know that I can divide 4 into 32 evenly, which gives me 8. And I can keep going, add that there. And I get 80, but I need to make sure my decimal goes in front of the 8, giving me 80 hundredths. I can represent that in a couple different ways. I could represent it using the decimal groups, or I could use base 10 lumps. For this one, it would just be 4 groups of 8 tenths. So I could do 4 groups of 8 tenths. That's it. And that should be it. If you have any more questions, feel free to reach out and just email me. I will have a couple of extra questions over the multiplication of decimals tomorrow, using the ones that were similar to on here that we did in multiplication, just because I'm trying to check and make sure that they understand the patterns of decimals, both for division and multiplication, as well as using the words in your estimation to determine that it is estimation. So just make sure that they understand the key word about estimate, round. Those 3 words are super key. But as for that, that is it. I am praying that everyone does well tomorrow and that we can get through this together and make sure that this review was a little bit helpful so that y'all can be successful and your kids can be successful.